The United States of America was formed out of a blaze of revolution in the 18th century. Within 200 years, the nation reached the height of its power, emerging triumphant and robust following two world wars that devastated many other great nations. However, the history of this region stretches back further and is deeper than most believe. This is the history of the United States of America. Before the formation of the United States, the history of the continent claims diverse and intriguing evolution. The documented voyages and later death of Christopher Columbus paved the way for further Spanish and Portuguese expeditions, which were to reveal the existence of South America with more accurate data and instruments at their disposal. References by mapmakers stated this was a new world. As stories were told of this new world, many people were intrigued and wanted to see for themselves. Therefore, the United States was to become a nation of immigrants filled with unwavering optimism and determination to succeed. However, before the settlement by Europeans and prior to explorers chartering the coastlines, the continent was inhabited by various native communities. It is theorized the first people came via Beringia, a land bridge that connected Russia and Alaska during the Ice Age. As the world temperature increased, the glaciers melted, raising the sea levels and thereby closing the land bridge. Over time, these first hunter-gatherers migrated throughout the continent and were the ancestors of all Native Americans. A variety of people, societies, languages, and cultures subsequently developed, most of which have been wiped out today. The land, climate, and nature were significant influences in the lives and beliefs of those who occupied it. One of the earliest societies was the Mississippi culture, where archaeology is established that they built raised cities and ceremonial burial mounds, with urban settlements sustained by a commendable trading network. In the Southwest, the Pueblos were known to have constructed complex multi-story villages built out of stone. To the northeast, 5 and later 6 nations banded together to form the Iroquois Confederacy. They developed a centralized democratic government, which comprised of representative chiefs. It is argued that this confederacy was formed shortly before European contact by the peacemaker. However, the actual date is hearsay as no records exist. Perhaps the earliest noteworthy explorer was Leif Erikson, a Norse explorer who during the 11th century was blown off course en route to Greenland. This natural storm led to his discovery of the island today now known as Newfoundland, but the Norse named his land Vineland. A settlement was constructed on the northern tip of the island, but the settlement proved not to be viable and quickly faded. During the 5th century, Europe was enjoying a safe land passage reaching to India and even as far as China.
These trade routes along the Silk Road enabled sources of valuable goods, such as silks and spices, to be traded. With the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire, however, the land route to Asia became more difficult. Christopher Columbus was sponsored by Isabella of Castile and made his voyage with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Arguably, it was the voyages and expeditions of Christopher Columbus that were a significant factor in the evolution of American history. Guided by the maps of Tuscany, Columbus reached the Bahamas in 1492. He would undertake 3 more voyages, and as a reward for his success, he was appointed governor of Hispaniola. However, even for this time in history, Columbus committed multiple cruel and vile acts upon the natives, killing the thousands, to the point where he was later brought back to Europe and imprisoned. The most significant factor in the demise of the natives had no immunity to the foreign diseases, and it is estimated that 90% of the population were wiped out. Over the following centuries, numerous European powers embarked on colonization efforts, where they sought to exploit both the land, resources, and opportunities the continent offered. The Spanish focused their efforts at colonizing the Caribbean, Florida, and its conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires of South America. As news of this newfound continent reached Europe during the early 17th century, French immigrants were attracted to the fur trade and the wealth it could bring. They also had a desire to convert the natives to Catholicism and traveled further down the St. Arch River, laying the foundations for New France. The Dutch followed suit, establishing several forts, towns, and trading posts along the Hudson River, which provided a network of trade. New Netherland, which the colony was known by, produced immense wealth for the Dutch. Other foreign nations began to envy the riches flowing out of the Hudson River Valley. The English set up their first colony in Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607, which became a key exporter of tobacco. With tobacco plantations and colonies expanding, the need for labor became urgent. Indentured servants received paid passage to the Americas along with food, clothing, and accommodation.
In the late 18th century, 13 colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast of North America. For over a century, they had lived under the rule of the British Crown, but by the 1770s, discontent was spreading. Heavy taxes, unfair laws, and a lack of representation in Parliament gave rise to a powerful cry: no taxation without representation. The roots of revolution were planted. Britain's attempt to control her colonies met fierce resistance. In Boston, protests turned violent. In 1770, British soldiers opened fire on civilians in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Just 3 years later, patriots disguised as Native Americans boarded ships in Boston Harbor and threw chests of tea into the sea. The Boston Tea Party was not just an act of defiance, it was a declaration that the colonies would no longer be silent. The situation soon exploded into open conflict. On April 19, 1775, at Lexington and Concord, the first shots were fired. Ordinary farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers stood against Britain's mighty army. This moment would be remembered as the shot heard round the world. The American Revolution had begun. The colonies quickly organized. George Washington, a Virginian known for his leadership, was appointed commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. His task was nearly impossible. The army had little training, scarce supplies, and no navy, yet Washington inspired his men with determination and courage. Then, in July 1776, the conflict reached a turning point. In Philadelphia, delegates of the 13 colonies gathered to make a momentous decision. Thomas Jefferson drafted a bold document, the Declaration of Independence. On July 4th, it was adopted. Its words shook the foundations of monarchy across the world. All men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With this, the colonies were no longer subjects of a king. They were citizens of a new nation, the United States of America. But independence had to be won on the battlefield. Bloody battles raged across the land. At Bunker Hill, the colonists fought bravely but were forced to retreat. At Saratoga, however, they won a decisive victory in 1777. That triumph convinced France to join the war, providing vital troops, weapons, and naval power. The winter at Valley Forge tested the army's spirit. Starving, freezing, and plagued by disease, many soldiers deserted, but those who remained were transformed under the training of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer who instilled discipline and unity. By spring, Washington's army was stronger than ever the war stretched on, but in 1781, the final chapter was written at Yorktown. With French forces by their side, the Americans surrounded British General Cornwallis. Trapped and outnumbered, he surrendered. The impossible had become reality. The United States had defeated the world's most powerful empire. 2 years later, in 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially